Aisha remembered ink. The rich, earthy scent of it clung to her father's robes, stained his fingertips, and filled their small, sunlit home. Her earliest memories were of swirling letters, intricate patterns her father, a renowned scholar, would draw for her amusement. He taught her the secrets of calligraphy, the delicate dance of the brush, the power held within each carefully crafted stroke. They lived a simple life, rich in knowledge and love, though their worldly possessions were few. Then sickness came, a swift and merciless thief. It stole her father, leaving Aisha alone in a world that suddenly felt vast and hostile. Greedy. Relatives, envious of her father's modest library, descended like vultures. They seized the books, the scrolls, the precious inks, everything Aisha held dear. They left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the chains that bound. Her wrists, she was sold to slavers, her life of scholarship reduced to a life of servitude. The journey to Sabrim was long and arduous. The desert sun beat down on Aisha, and the rough ropes chafed her skin. Yet even in chains, she held her head high. The fire in her spirit, the love of knowledge her father had instilled, refused to be extinguished. The palace of Sabrim was a world of marble and gold, of lush gardens and shimmering fountains. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, but for Aisha, it was a gilded cage. She was one of many, a nameless face among the throng of slaves who served the Sultan and his household. The days in the harem were long and monotonous. The air was thick with the scent of perfumes and the whispers of gossip. Aisha, with her scholar's heart and calloused hands, was assigned to the palace library, a place both familiar and heartbreaking. Here, surrounded by the very tools of her craft, she was tasked with the endless copying of ancient texts. The irony was not lost on her. Once a student of knowledge, now a mere replicator. Yet even in this drudgery, Aisha found solace. The feel of the brush in her hand, the flow of ink on parchment, was a connection to her past, a reminder of who she was. She poured her heart into each stroke, her skill and precision evident in every carefully crafted letter. While her body was enslaved, her mind remained free, soaring through the words she copied, finding meaning and beauty even in the most mundane of texts. She was a scholar in chains, a calligrapher in captivity, but her spirit, like the ink she so loved, remained indelible. Sultan Najib, ruler of Sabrim, was a man of contradictions. In the grand hall, adorned with tapestries and gleaming with polished marble, he was the picture of strength and authority. His voice, when he addressed his council, was firm and decisive. His judgments were known throughout the land for their fairness and wisdom. He was a warrior, a strategist, a leader of men. Yet beneath the ceremonial armor, beneath the weight of his crown, beat the heart of a romantic. He loved poetry, the delicate dance of words, the hidden meanings whispered between the lines. He yearned for intellectual companionship, for someone who could understand the depths of his thoughts, the dreams he dared not speak aloud. He found none of this in Sultana Rima, his wife. Rima was a woman of noble birth, her lineage stretching back to the very founders of Sabrim. She was beautiful, impeccably dressed, and skilled in the art of courtly intrigue. She was a valuable political asset, her connections strengthening Najib's hold on the throne. But their marriage was one of convenience, not of kindred spirits. Rima cared little for poetry or philosophy. Her world revolved around power, position, and the intricate web of alliances that maintained her status. Najib respected her, but he did not love her. One sweltering afternoon, Najib found himself drawn to the palace library, seeking refuge from the stifling formality of the court. He browsed the shelves, his fingers tracing the spines of ancient texts, searching for something to soothe his restless soul. He came across a manuscript, its pages brittle with age, its script faded and almost illegible. It was a collection of poems attributed to a long-forgotten sage. As he read, he stumbled upon a verse that had been miscopied for generations, its meaning distorted, its beauty diminished. He frowned, puzzled by the apparent error. At that moment, a soft voice spoke. "Your Majesty, if I may be so bold, I believe that verse is incorrect." Najib turned, surprised to find a slave girl addressing him. It was Aisha, her head bowed respectfully, her hands clasped before her. Intrigued, he gestured for her to elaborate. Aisha, with a quiet confidence that belied her chained wrists, explained the error, reciting the correct verse from memory. She spoke of the poem's deeper meaning, its subtle nuances, its connection to the philosophical traditions of their ancestors. Najib listened, captivated. He had never encountered such intellect, such passion in anyone, let alone a slave. He summoned her to his private chambers, the chains on her wrists a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings. He questioned her about her background, her education, her love of literature. Aisha, emboldened by his genuine interest, spoke freely, sharing her memories of her father, their shared passion for knowledge, the tragic circumstances that led to her enslavement. Hours passed in conversation, the Sultan and the slave engrossed in a world of words and ideas. Najib felt a connection with Aisha he had never experienced before. He saw in her a kindred spirit, a mind that mirrored his own. He saw, for the first time, a glimmer of the intellectual companionship he had always craved. He forgot his duties, forgot his wife, forgot everything but the quiet, intelligent voice of the slave girl who sat before him, her eyes shining with the same love of knowledge that burned within his own heart. The library became their sanctuary. Najib would find excuses to visit, sometimes feigning an interest in a particular manuscript, other times simply claiming a need for solitude. Aisha, tasked with organizing the scrolls and cataloguing new acquisitions, would await his arrival with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Their conversations continued, whispered amongst the towering shelves, hidden in the hushed corners of the vast room. They spoke of poetry, of philosophy, of the history of Sabrim and the legends of its people. Najib found himself drawn to Aisha's sharp mind, her insightful observations, and the quiet strength that radiated from her despite her circumstances. He learned of her father, the scholar who had instilled in her a love of learning, and he felt a pang of sympathy for the life she had lost. Aisha, in turn, found herself captivated by Najib's hidden romanticism, the gentle soul that lay beneath his regal exterior. She saw in him a man burdened by responsibility, yearning for a connection he could not find within the confines of his court. She felt a growing affection for him, a dangerous flicker of hope in a heart that had known only loss. Their stolen moments were precious, a brief respite from the harsh realities of their respective worlds. The library, once a place of quiet drudgery for Aisha, now held a different kind of magic. The scent of aged parchment and leather was mingled with the sweet fragrance of Najib's sandalwood cologne, a subtle reminder of their shared secret. One afternoon, Najib arrived bearing gifts. He presented Aisha with a set of exquisite inks, imported from distant lands, their colors vibrant and rich. He also brought her a stack of fine parchment, smooth and creamy to the touch. "These are for you, Aisha," he said, his voice low and warm. "Your calligraphy deserves the finest materials." Aisha accepted the gifts with a grateful curtsy, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and sadness. She knew that these tokens of affection, however small, were a dangerous indulgence in a world where their relationship could never be. She carefully arranged the inks and parchment on her work table, their presence a constant reminder of the Sultan's kindness and the impossible nature of their bond. Rima, however, was not oblivious to Najib's increasing absences from the royal chambers. She noticed his frequent visits to the library, the lingering scent of sandalwood that clung to his robes, the subtle shift in his demeanor. Her spies within the harem, eager to curry favor, whispered tales of the Sultan's fascination with the slave girl, the calligrapher with the intelligent eyes and the quiet voice. Rima's initial annoyance quickly blossomed into full-blown jealousy. She had never considered Aisha a threat, a mere slave among many. But the whispers, coupled with Najib's growing distance, painted a picture she could not ignore. The slave girl was stealing her husband's attention, his affection, his time. And Rima, accustomed to being the center of Najib's world, however, superficial that world may be, would not tolerate it. A seed of suspicion, of resentment began to take root in her heart, poisoning the already fragile balance of their marriage. She began to watch Aisha, her gaze sharp and calculating, searching for a weakness, a vulnerability, a way to remove this unexpected obstacle from her path. Aisha's heart ached with a bittersweet longing. The stolen moments with Najib, the shared whispers in the library, had become the center of her world. His kindness, his respect, his genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams had awakened a feeling within her she hadn't known she possessed. She found herself looking forward to his visits, her hand trembling as she prepared the inks and parchment. For their shared study, she cherished the gifts he had given her, the vibrant inks and smooth parchment, a tangible representation of his affection. Yet with each stolen glance, each shared smile, the reality of their situation crashed down upon her. He was the Sultan, she a slave. Their worlds were separated by an insurmountable chasm of social status and political reality. The other slaves in the harem noticed the change in Aisha. They saw the way she blushed when Najib's name was mentioned, the faraway look in her eyes when she returned from the library. Whispers followed her like shadows, weaving tales of the Sultan's favor, the slave girl who had captured his attention. Some were envious, their words laced with bitterness. They spoke of witchcraft and seduction, of Aisha's supposed attempts to ensnare the Sultan with her beauty and her intelligence. Others were simply curious, their gossip fueled by boredom and a thirst for scandal. They speculated on the nature of Najib and Aisha's relationship, their imaginations running wild with stories of secret romances and forbidden love. Fatma, a kind older slave who had taken Aisha under her wing, warned her of the dangers of courtly intrigue. "Be careful, child," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The Sultan's favor is a fickle thing. It can lift you up one day and cast you down the next." Aisha listened, her heart heavy with the weight of Fatma's words. She knew the risks, the potential consequences of her growing affection for Najib. She understood the precariousness of her position, the vulnerability of a slave who dared to dream of something more. Yet she couldn't deny the feelings that bloomed within her, the fragile hope that whispered of a different life, a life where love and knowledge could coexist. The nights were the hardest. In the quiet darkness of the harem, surrounded by the soft snores of the other slaves, Aisha's thoughts would race. She would replay her conversations with Najib, savoring each word, each shared glance. She would imagine a world where they could be together, a world free from the constraints of their respective roles. But these dreams were always tinged with sadness, the knowledge that they could never be more than fleeting fantasies. The chains on her wrists were a constant reminder of her place, a physical manifestation of the invisible barriers that separated her from the man she was beginning to love. She tossed and turned, her sleep disturbed by the conflicting emotions that warred within her. The joy of Najib's presence, the warmth of his affection, battled against the fear of discovery, the knowledge that their secret, if revealed, could have devastating consequences for them both. She longed for a future she knew was impossible, A future where her heart and her mind could find peace, a future where she could be more than just a slave, more than just the Sultan's secret. The rhythm of the palace shifted. Najib, once a regular presence at Rima's side during state dinners and council meetings, now found reasons to be elsewhere. He spent less time discussing trade agreements and border disputes with his advisors, and more time in the quiet sanctuary of the library, poring over ancient texts with Aisha. He found her insights into matters of governance surprisingly astute. She possessed a keen understanding of the needs of the people, a perspective often lacking in the rarefied air of the court. He began to seek her counsel on matters of state, valuing her fresh perspective and her unwavering commitment to justice and fairness. Their conversations expanded beyond poetry and philosophy. They discussed the challenges facing the kingdom, the complexities of trade negotiations, the delicate balance of power between Sabrim and its neighboring lands. Najib shared his dreams for his people, his vision of a prosperous and just kingdom, a vision Aisha embraced with equal passion. He confided in her his frustrations with the court, the petty squabbles and self-serving agendas that often hindered his ability to govern effectively. Aisha listened patiently, offering thoughtful advice and unwavering support. She became his confidant, his advisor, a trusted voice in a world filled with whispers and deceit. Rima watched the growing bond between her husband and the slave girl with mounting fury. The whispers in the harem grew louder, more pointed. They spoke of secret meetings, of shared smiles, of the Sultan's obvious preference for the calligrapher's company over that of his own wife. Rima's pride was wounded, her position threatened. She had always been the undisputed queen of Sabrim, the woman who stood beside the Sultan, the embodiment of power and prestige. Now a mere slave, a girl with ink-stained fingers and a scholar's heart, was usurping her place. She began to gather allies, weaving a web of influence within the harem and the court. She sought out those who resented Aisha's sudden rise, in favor those who envied her closeness to the Sultan. She whispered tales of Aisha's manipulative nature, suggesting that the slave girl was using witchcraft to ensnare Najib, to control his thoughts and actions. She painted a picture of a dangerous seductress, a threat to the stability of the throne, a woman who needed to be silenced. Her primary confidant became Zara, a sharp-tongued woman who had served Rima faithfully for years. Zara, ambitious and resentful of Aisha's newfound influence, became Rima's eyes and ears within the palace. She reported back on every interaction between Najib and Aisha, every shared glance, every whispered word. She fueled Rima's jealousy with exaggerated tales of the Sultan's affection for the slave girl, twisting innocent gestures into declarations of love, casual conversations into clandestine meetings. Rima also sought support from members of the royal council, men who had long benefited from her family's connections and influence. She reminded them of the potential scandal, the damage to Najib's reputation if his infatuation with a slave became public knowledge. She hinted at Aisha's foreign origins, suggesting that she might be a spy, a plant from a rival kingdom seeking to undermine Sabrim's stability. Slowly, carefully, Rima began to build her case against Aisha, weaving a tapestry of lies and innuendo designed to destroy the slave girl's reputation and remove her from the Sultan's favor. She knew that Najib was a just and honorable man, a man who valued truth and fairness. But she also knew that he was vulnerable to the pressures of the court, the whispers of his advisors, the demands of his political allies, and she was determined to exploit that vulnerability, to turn Najib against Aisha, to reclaim her position as the undisputed queen of Sabrim. The seeds of doubt, planted by Rima's cunning hand, began to take root, poisoning the atmosphere of the palace and casting a dark shadow over the burgeoning relationship between the Sultan and the slave. The Scent of jasmine and rose hung heavy in the air as Rima entered Najib's private chambers. He sat at his desk, reviewing reports from the royal treasury, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't seen her in his chambers for days. "Rima," he said, his voice a mixture of formality and curiosity. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" Rima glided across the room, her silk robes rustling softly against the polished marble floor. She seated herself gracefully on a plush divan, her posture regal and composed. "My husband," she began, her voice smooth as honey, "I have come to speak to you about a matter of some concern." Najib set aside the reports, his attention now fully focused on his wife. "What troubles you, Rima?" "It is the talk of the court, Najib," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The whispers, the rumors, about you and the slave girl, Aisha." Najib's expression hardened. "Rumors?" he repeated, his tone guarded. "What rumors?" They say that you favor her above all others," Rima continued, her voice laced with a carefully crafted blend of concern and hurt. "That you spend hours with her in the library, neglecting your duties, neglecting me." Najib shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He knew that his frequent visits to the library had attracted attention, but he hadn't realized the extent of the gossip. "Aisha is intelligent, insightful," he said defensively. "She offers a valuable perspective on matters of state." Rima smiled thinly. "Is that all it is, Najib? Mere intellectual companionship?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or is there something more, something darker at play?" Najib frowned. "Darker? What do you mean?" Rima's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "There are those who say that she uses witchcraft, that she has bewitched you, Najib, that she has ensnared you with her spells and potions." Najib scoffed. "Witchcraft? Rima, you don't believe such nonsense, do you?" Rima shrugged, her expression carefully neutral. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Najib. Your behavior has been unusual. Your distance, your preoccupation. With this slave girl, it's not like you." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The court is watching, Najib," she continued, her voice soft but insistent. "They are whispering. They are questioning your judgment, your affections. They say that you love the slave more than your own wife." Najib felt a knot of tension tighten in his chest. He hadn't considered the political ramifications of his relationship with Aisha. He had been so caught up in their shared intellectual pursuits, in the genuine connection he felt with her, that he had failed to see how their interactions might be perceived by others. Rima's words, like tiny, venomous spiders, began to crawl into his mind, planting seeds of doubt. Was he being manipulated? Was Aisha's intelligence, her charm, a carefully crafted facade designed to gain his favor? He pushed the thought away, unwilling to believe that Aisha, the woman who had shown him such kindness, such understanding, could be capable of such deceit. Yet the seed had been planted. The whispers in the court grew louder. They echoed in the hallways, swirling around Najib like a swarm of stinging insects. They spoke of his inappropriate affection for a slave, his neglect of his queen, his susceptibility to witchcraft and manipulation. Najib found himself increasingly isolated, surrounded by suspicion and distrust. He tried to ignore the rumors, to dismiss them as petty gossip, but they persisted, gnawing at his confidence, eroding his peace of mind. He looked at Aisha, her eyes clear and honest, and he desperately wanted to believe in her innocence. But Rima's words, like a poison, had begun to taint his perception, casting a shadow of doubt over the bond they had so carefully nurtured. The whispers, once a faint murmur, had become a deafening roar, threatening to consume them both. The annual harvest festival was a time of celebration in Sabrim. The palace courtyards overflowed with music, dancing, and the rich aroma of roasted meats and spiced wines. Banners of crimson and gold fluttered in the warm breeze, and the air buzzed with the joyous chatter of courtiers and dignitaries. But beneath the surface of festivity, a storm was brewing. Rima, dressed in a gown of shimmering emerald green, stood beside Najib on the raised dais, her smile fixed and brittle. She had waited for this moment, this public display of unity, to execute her plan. As the festivities reached their peak, she raised her hand, silencing the musicians and commanding the attention of the assembled crowd. Her voice, clear and ringing, cut through the sudden hush. "My loyal subjects," she began, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, "I come before you today with a heavy heart. A darkness has fallen upon our palace, a shadow of deceit and treachery." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, their festive mood replaced by a growing unease. "A slave girl, Aisha by name, has infiltrated our home, weaving a web of lies and manipulation," Rima continued, her voice rising with each word. "She has used dark magic, witchcraft, to ensnare our beloved Sultan, to cloud his judgment and turn his heart away from his rightful queen." A gasp went through the crowd. All eyes turned to Aisha, who stood near the edge of the dais, her face pale and drawn. She had known that Rima was plotting against her, but she hadn't anticipated such a public and dramatic accusation. This slave girl, this witch, has poisoned the Sultan's mind, turning him against his loyal advisors, against his own wife, Rima declared, her voice trembling with feigned outrage. "She seeks to undermine the stability of our kingdom, to destroy everything we hold dear." She turned to Najib, her eyes blazing with accusation. "My husband, you must act. You must protect our kingdom from this evil influence. You must rid our palace of this treacherous serpent." She pointed a trembling finger at Aisha. "I demand her execution. Only then can Sabrim be safe." The crowd erupted in a cacophony of shouts and whispers. Some echoed Rima's demands, their voices filled with fear and anger. Others remained silent, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Najib stood frozen, caught in the crosshairs of Rima's accusations. He looked at Aisha, her eyes wide. With fear, her chains glinting in the torchlight, he knew in his heart that she was innocent, that Rima's accusations were nothing more than malicious lies. But he also knew the power of public opinion, the weight of political pressure. He was the Sultan, the protector of his kingdom. He had a duty to his people, to his advisors, to his wife. He felt torn, his heart battling against his head. He loved Aisha, cherished her intelligence and her spirit, but could he risk the stability of his kingdom, the loyalty of his subjects, for the sake of a slave girl? The council members, sensing his hesitation, began to murmur amongst themselves, their voices growing louder, more insistent. They urged him to act, to appease the crowd, to quell the growing unrest. Najib closed his eyes, the weight of his crown pressing down on him like a physical burden. He had to make a choice. He could uphold justice, defend Aisha against Rima's false accusations, and risk the wrath of the court and the potential instability of his kingdom. Or he could appease the crowd, sacrifice Aisha to satisfy their fear and anger, and preserve his own political power. The decision, he knew, would have far-reaching consequences, not only for himself and Aisha, but for the future of Sabrim. The joyous celebration had turned into a trial, a public spectacle where the fate of a slave girl hung in the balance. The pressure on Najib was immense. The council, spurred by Rima's public accusations, demanded action. They argued that Aisha's presence in the palace was a threat to the stability of the kingdom, that the rumors of witchcraft and the Sultan's supposed infatuation with a slave were undermining his authority. They insisted that she be banished, sent far away from Sabrim to quell the unrest and restore order. Najib paced the length of his private chambers, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He knew that Rima's accusations were false, that Aisha was innocent of the charges against her. He valued her counsel, her intelligence, her quiet strength. He had come to rely on her, to trust her implicitly. The thought of sending her away, of casting her out into the unknown, filled him with a profound sense of unease. He argued with the council, defending Aisha's character, highlighting her contributions to the kingdom. He spoke of her insights into matters of governance, her unwavering commitment to justice and fairness. But his words fell on deaf ears. The council, fueled by Rima's influence and their own fears of political instability, remained steadfast in their demands. They insisted that Najib prioritize the stability of the kingdom over his personal affections for a slave. "Your Majesty," said Omar, the elder statesman of the council, his voice grave and measured, "we understand your fondness for this. A girl, but appearances matter. The rumors are spreading like wildfire, eroding your authority, undermining the trust of your people. You must act decisively for the good of Sabrim." Najib knew that Omar spoke the truth. The rumors were damaging his reputation, creating a climate of fear and suspicion within the court. He couldn't ignore the political realities of the situation. He had a duty to his people, a responsibility to maintain order and stability. Within his kingdom, he sank into his chair, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his decision. He felt trapped, caught between his love for Aisha and his duty to his kingdom. He closed his eyes, picturing Aisha's face, her intelligent eyes, her gentle smile. The thought of sending her away, of condemning her to an uncertain fate, filled him with a deep sense of guilt and regret. Meanwhile, Aisha sat alone in her small chamber in the harem, her heart pounding in her chest. News of Rima's public accusation and the council's demands had reached her, spreading through the palace like a chilling wind. She knew that her life was in danger, that her fate rested in the hands of a man torn between his affection for her and the pressures of his court. Fear gnawed at her, a cold, relentless dread. She had faced hardship before, endured the loss of her father, the indignity of slavery. But this felt different. This was a threat to her very existence, a sentence of exile or even death. She clutched the small pouch of inks Najib had given, her fingers tracing the smooth, cool surface of the containers. They were a tangible reminder of his kindness, his affection, the stolen moments of shared joy and intellectual companionship they had found in the library. The thought of never seeing him again, of never hearing his voice, of never sharing another conversation about poetry or philosophy filled her with a profound sense of loss. She had allowed herself to hope, to dream of a future where their bond might deepen, where their connection might blossom into something more. Now, those dreams were crumbling around her, replaced by the harsh reality of her situation. She was a slave, accused of witchcraft, her life hanging by a thread. She paced the confines of her small room, her mind racing, searching for a way out, a glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. She knew that she couldn't rely on Najib to save her. He was caught in a political web, bound by duty and obligation. She had to find a way to protect herself, to prove her innocence, to escape the fate that Rima and the council had decreed for her. She looked out the small window at the moon hanging low in the night sky, a silent witness to her fear and desperation. She knew that she had to act, and act quickly if she wanted to survive. The time for quiet scholarship, for stolen moments in the library, was over. The time for survival had begun. Aisha knew her time was running out. The council's whispers had become pronouncements. Her banishment, perhaps even her execution, was imminent. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. But fear was a useless emotion. It dulled the mind and weakened the will. Her father, the scholar, had taught her that knowledge was power, And even in chains, Aisha still possessed the power of her mind. She had to act, and act quickly. Rima's accusations of witchcraft were absurd, easily disproven. But Rima held the power in the palace. Now, Aisha needed something more, something concrete, something that would expose Rima's true nature and discredit her in Najib's eyes. An idea sparked in the darkness of her small chamber. Rima's accusations stemmed from jealousy, a desperate attempt to eliminate a perceived rival. But what if Rima's jealousy masked a deeper, darker secret? What if there was something in Rima's past, something she desperately wanted to hide? Aisha remembered the palace archives, a vast, dusty labyrinth beneath the library. It housed centuries of records, scrolls detailing the history of Sabrim, the lineage of its rulers, the transactions of its commerce. Somewhere within those dusty tomes, Aisha believed, lay the key to Rima's secret, the weapon she needed to defend herself. The next day, Aisha pleaded with the head librarian, a wizened old man named Yusuf, for access to the archives. She feigned an interest in researching ancient calligraphy techniques, a plausible excuse given her skills. Yusuf, a kind soul who had always admired Aisha's diligence and talent, granted her request. The archives were a world away from the bright, airy library. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, the light dim and filtered through narrow, high windows. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, laden with scrolls and ledgers bound in leather and tied. With faded ribbons, Aisha began her search, her fingers tracing the spines of ancient texts, her eyes scanning the faded script. She focused on records of slave sales, meticulously examining each entry, searching for any connection to Rima, any hint of a hidden transgression. Days turned into weeks. Aisha spent every spare moment in the archives, her fingers becoming stained. With ink and dust, her eyes weary from the strain of deciphering ancient script. The task was daunting, the sheer volume of records overwhelming. She felt like a tiny ant navigating a vast and intricate maze, but she persevered, driven by a desperate hope, a burning need to uncover the truth. She knew that time was running out, that each passing day brought her closer to the fate Rima had decreed for her. She ate little, slept less. The other slaves whispered about her obsession, her relentless pursuit of some unknown secret hidden within the dusty depths of the archives. Fatma, her kind protector, brought her food and water, urging her to rest, to take care of herself. But Aisha couldn't stop. She felt a growing sense of urgency, a premonition that she was close, that the answer she sought was within her grasp. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the high windows, Aisha stumbled upon a section of the archives dedicated to the records of the royal household. She pulled down a heavy ledger, its cover brittle with age, its pages filled with the elegant script of a long-forgotten scribe. It detailed the household expenses of Sultana Fatima, Rima's predecessor. As Aisha scanned the entries, her heart skipped a beat. She found a record of a substantial payment made to a notorious slave trader, a man known for his ruthlessness and his dealings in human misery. The date of the transaction coincided with the period just before Rima's marriage to Najib. Aisha's mind raced. Why would Rima's predecessor have made such a large payment to a slave trader? What kind of slave would have commanded such a high price? A sense of foreboding washed over her, a chilling premonition that she was on the verge of uncovering something truly terrible, something that would change everything. She knew she had to find out more, to delve deeper into the secrets hidden within these dusty pages. The truth, she sensed, was close, and it was more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows across the dusty shelves of the archives. Aisha, her face smudged with ink and dust, hunched over a crumbling ledger, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence of the vast chamber was broken only by the rustling of parchment and the soft scratch of her quill. She had been working for days, fueled by a desperate hope, a burning need to uncover the truth. The weight of the council's decision pressed down on her, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her situation. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed through the stillness. Aisha looked up, startled. A figure emerged from the shadows, his form tall and regal, his face etched with concern. It was Najib. "Aisha," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous." Aisha rose to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen him since Rima's public accusation, since the council had demanded her banishment. She had expected anger, perhaps even condemnation. But his eyes held only worry and a flicker of guilt. I had to find something," she stammered, gesturing towards the open ledger. "Something to prove my innocence." Najib stepped closer, his gaze falling upon the ancient document. "What have you found?" Aisha explained her discovery. The record of the large payment made to the slave trader, the timing of the transaction, its proximity to Rima's marriage. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to share her suspicions. Najib listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. He understood the implications of Aisha's discovery, the potential scandal it could unleash. He also understood the danger Aisha was putting herself in by pursuing this line of inquiry. "Aisha," he said, his voice grave, "this is dangerous territory. Rima will not hesitate to silence anyone who threatens her position." Aisha met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I have nothing left to lose, Your Majesty. I must find the truth, even if it costs me my life." Najib looked at her, at the strength and resilience that shone through her weariness and fear. He felt a pang of guilt, a deep regret for the pain he had caused her, for the impossible situation he had placed her in. He had allowed himself to be swayed by the whispers of the court, by the pressures of his advisers. He had failed to protect her, to defend her against Rima's malicious lies. "Let me help you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We will find the truth together." He sat down beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. The simple act of physical proximity, of shared purpose, sent a wave of warmth through Aisha's chilled veins. Together, they pored over the ancient records, their hands brushing against each other as they turned the brittle pages. They searched for any mention of the slave purchased by Rima's predecessor, any clue to her identity, her fate. The hours passed unnoticed, the silence of the archives broken only by the rustling of parchment and their whispered conversations. They spoke of their shared love of knowledge, their mutual respect for truth and justice. They spoke of the challenges facing the kingdom, the complexities of governance, the burden of leadership. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, their hopes for a better future. In that dusty, forgotten corner of the palace, surrounded by the ghosts of Sabrim's past, their bond deepened. The danger, the uncertainty of their situation faded into the background, replaced by a sense of shared purpose, a quiet understanding that transcended the vast chasm that separated their worlds. The Sultan and the slave, united in their search for the truth, found solace and strength in each other's presence, a fragile beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The ledger was heavy in Aisha's hands, its leather cover cracked and worn. The pages, brittle with age, rustled like dried leaves as she carefully turned them. It was a record of slave sales, dating back decades, its entries meticulously documented in a neat, precise hand. Each entry listed the slave's name, age, origin, and the price paid. Most were just names, a list of souls reduced to commodities, their stories lost to the passage of time. Najib sat beside her, the lamplight illuminating his face, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. They had been working for hours, poring over countless documents, searching for any clue, any connection to Rima. The silence of the archives was broken only by the soft scratch of Aisha's quill as she made notes on a scrap of parchment. Then she saw it, an entry near the bottom of a page dated several years before Rima's marriage to Najib. The name of the slave was listed simply as Girl, age, approximately 7, origin, unknown. A substantial sum had been paid for her, a sum far exceeding the usual price for a child slave. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. Something about this entry resonated with her, a faint echo of a memory long buried beneath layers of pain and loss. She read the accompanying description, her heart pounding in her chest. Girl, approximately 7 years of age, it read. Highly intelligent, skilled in calligraphy, believed to be the daughter of a deceased scholar. The words blurred before Aisha's eyes. The description, it matched her. The age, the calligraphy skills, the deceased scholar father. It was all there. A chillingly accurate portrayal of her own lost childhood. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Shisha, what is it? Najib asked, his voice filled with concern. Shisha pointed to the entry, her hand trembling. This is me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is the record of my sale. Najib leaned closer, his eyes scanning the faded script. He saw the details, the chilling similarities between the description and the woman who sat beside him. A wave of understanding, of horror, washed over him. He finally understood the reason for Rima's intense jealousy, her relentless persecution. Of Aisha. He looked at Aisha, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. He reached out, his hand covering hers, offering a silent comfort, a shared understanding of the terrible truth they had uncovered. Aisha stared at the entry, the words swimming before her eyes. Fragments of memories, long suppressed, began to surface. She remembered a small sunlit room, filled with the scent of ink and parchment. She remembered a kind, gentle man with ink-stained fingers, teaching her the delicate art of calligraphy. She remembered a sudden illness, a swift and merciless thief that stole her father, leaving her alone and vulnerable. Then, darkness. A hazy recollection of being taken away, of being sold to strangers, of a long and arduous journey to an unknown destination. The memories were fragmented, incomplete, like pieces of a shattered mirror. But they were there, confirmation of the truth she had just discovered. She was the girl in the ledger, the slave purchased for an exorbitant sum, the daughter of a deceased scholar. And the woman who had orchestrated her sale, the woman who had condemned her to a life of servitude, was none other than Sultana Rima. The weight of the revelation pressed down on Aisha, crushing her with its enormity. She looked at Najib, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. She saw the dawning comprehension in his eyes, the realization of the terrible truth that lay before them. They had found the secret they were searching for, but the cost of that discovery was far greater than they could have ever imagined. The truth, like a double-edged sword, had cut through the lies and deception, revealing a betrayal that would shatter the very foundations of the palace and change their lives forever. Tucked within the back of the heavy ledger, Aisha found a small packet of letters, tied with a faded silk ribbon. Her fingers trembled as she untied the ribbon, her heart pounding in her chest. The letters were written in a delicate, flowing hand, the ink faded but still legible. They were addressed to Sultana Fatima, Rima's predecessor, from a man named Hakim. Aisha recognized the name. Hakim was a wealthy merchant, known for his shrewd business dealings and his close ties to the royal family. He was also Aisha now realized with a jolt the name of her father. The first letter detailed a proposal. Hakim offered to sell his youngest daughter, a gifted calligrapher, to Sultana Fatima. He explained that he was facing financial ruin and needed a substantial sum of money to settle his debts. He assured Fatima that the girl was healthy, intelligent, and obedient, a valuable addition to the royal household. He also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the girl's mother had died years earlier, leaving him to raise her alone. Aisha's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Her father, he had sold her. He had traded her life, her freedom, for money. The realization hit her like a physical blow, a crushing weight of betrayal and abandonment. She read on, her eyes blurring with tears. The subsequent letters detailed the arrangements for the sale, the price agreed upon, the date of the girl's delivery to the palace. They spoke of the girl as if she were a mere object, a commodity to be bought and sold. There was no mention of love, no hint of regret, only cold, hard calculations of profit and loss. Then Aisha came to the final letter. It was from Rima, written shortly after Fatima's death. She thanked Hakim for his discretion, for his willingness to keep the girl's true identity a secret. She explained that she had always resented Fatima's fondness for the girl, her preferential treatment. She admitted that she had orchestrated the girl's sale, using her influence over Fatima to secure the transaction. She confessed that she had hoped the girl would be sent far away, never to be seen again. She wrote that she had done it to protect her own position, to ensure her own future as sultana. Rima's letter ended with a chillingly casual request for Hakim to destroy all correspondence related to the sale. She reminded him that their secret, if revealed, could have devastating consequences for them both. Aisha's hands trembled as she set the letters down. The truth, in all its stark and brutal clarity, lay before her. Rima hadn't simply been jealous of her. She had been terrified of her. Terrified of the truth being revealed, terrified of the consequences of her own actions. Rima had sold her own half-sister into slavery. Aisha's mind reeled. Her father, Hakim, had been married twice. Rima was the daughter of his first wife, a woman of noble birth. Aisha was the daughter of his second wife, a woman of humble origins. Rima had known all along who Aisha was. She had known that the gifted calligrapher, the slave girl who had captured Najib's attention, was her own flesh and blood, and she had done everything in her power to destroy her. The revelation hit Aisha with the force of a physical blow. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, not only by her father, but by the woman who shared his blood, the woman who should have been her sister, her protector. She sat in the silence of the archives, surrounded by the ghosts of Sabrim's past, the weight of the truth pressing down on her, crushing her with its enormity. The letters, like pieces of a shattered mirror, reflected a broken family, a web of secrets and lies, and a betrayal that had spanned decades. She and Rima, linked by blood, separated by circumstance, were now bound together by a terrible shared secret. A secret that threatened to unravel the very fabric of the palace. A secret that would change their lives forever. Aisha did not sleep. The letters burned in her mind, each word a searing brand. She held the proof of Rima's betrayal, the key to her own tragic past. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, but Aisha felt no warmth. She knew what she had to do. She found Rima in the royal gardens, tending to her prized orchids. The sultana, dressed in a flowing gown of pale blue silk, appeared serene, almost regal, the picture of innocence. Aisha approached, her steps slow and deliberate, the packet of letters clutched tightly in her hand. "Sultana Rima," Aisha said, her voice quiet but steady. Rima turned, her brow furrowing in annoyance. "What do you want, slave?" "I believe these belong to you," Aisha said, holding out the packet of letters. Rima's eyes widened as she recognized the faded silk ribbon, the brittle parchment. Her composure faltered, a flicker of fear crossing her carefully composed features. Where did you get those?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't matter," Aisha replied, her voice hardening. "What matters is what they contain." Aisha began to read aloud, her voice clear and unwavering. She read Hakim's proposal to sell his daughter, the details of the transaction, the confirmation of Rima's involvement. She read Rima's own words, her confession of jealousy, her admission of guilt. As Aisha read, Rima's face drained of color. Her eyes darted around the garden, searching for an escape, a way to deny the undeniable truth. But there was no escape. The words, like poisoned arrows, pierced her carefully constructed facade, exposing the darkness that lay beneath. "It's a lie," Rima cried, her voice shrill and desperate. "It's a forgery. This slave girl is trying to trick you." Aisha continued reading, her voice unwavering, her gaze fixed on Rima's face. She read the final letter, Rima's casual request for Hakim to destroy all evidence of the sale, her chilling reminder of the consequences of their shared secret. When Aisha finished, a heavy silence descended upon the garden. The birdsong seemed to cease, the gentle breeze stilled, as if the very air held its breath. Rima stood frozen, her face ashen, her eyes wide with horror. The truth, in all its stark and brutal clarity, hung between them, a heavy, suffocating. "Wait! You knew," Aisha whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and grief. "You knew all along who I was." Rima's lips moved, but no sound came out. She swayed slightly as if about to faint. The carefully cultivated mask of composure she had worn for so long finally crumbled, revealing the fear and guilt that gnawed at her soul. You're my sister," Aisha said, the words barely audible. The realization hit Rima with the force of a physical blow. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a sob. The truth, the terrible, undeniable truth, crashed down upon her, shattering the carefully constructed world of lies and deception she had built around herself. She had persecuted her own sister, condemned her to a life of servitude, driven by jealousy and fear. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I swear I didn't know it was you." Aisha looked at her, her heart aching with a mixture of anger and pity. She saw the fear in Rima's eyes, the dawning comprehension of the enormity of her actions. "You knew," Aisha repeated, her voice stronger now. "You may not have recognized my face, but you knew. You knew you were selling your own sister into slavery." Rima sank to her knees, her body racked with sobs. The carefully tended orchids, symbols of her power and prestige, lay scattered around her, their delicate petals crushed beneath her weight. The queen, stripped of her crown, her composure, her carefully constructed facade, was nothing more than a broken woman, consumed by guilt and regret. The truth, like a raging fire, had consumed the lies, leaving behind only ashes and the bitter taste of betrayal. Rima stumbled through the palace corridors, her silk robes trailing behind her, her face streaked with tears. The carefully arranged mask of composure she had worn for so long had shattered, leaving her raw and vulnerable. She had to find Najib. She had to confess. She found him in his private study, poring over maps of the kingdom, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he saw her tear-stained face. "Rima, what is it?" he asked, his voice gentle. Rima collapsed at his feet, her body racked with sobs. She clutched his robes, her fingers digging into the rich fabric. "Najib," she gasped, her voice choked with tears. I have to tell you everything." Najib knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "What is it, Rima? What's wrong?" Rima took a deep breath, struggling to compose herself. "It's Aisha," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's about Aisha. And me." She poured out the whole story, the truth she had kept hidden for so long. She told him about her father's financial troubles, his proposal to sell his younger daughter to Sultana Fatima. She confessed her own involvement in the heir transaction, her jealousy of Fatima's fondness for the girl, her desire to see her gone. She admitted that she had known all along that Aisha was her half-sister, the daughter of her father's second wife. Najib listened in stunned silence, his face hardening with each word. Anger, hot and fierce, coursed through him. He felt betrayed, not only by Rima's deception, but by his own blindness. He had been so easily manipulated, so quick to believe the rumors, the whispers of witchcraft and seduction. He had failed to see the truth, the terrible, tragic truth that lay hidden. Beneath the surface, you sold your own sister into slavery, he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Rima nodded, her tears flowing freely. "I didn't know it was her," she sobbed. "Not at first. I didn't recognize her. She was just a child, a nameless slave girl." "But you knew," Najib said, his voice rising. "You knew who her father was. You knew she was your sister, and you still did it." Rima covered her face with her hands, her body shaking with grief. "I was young," she whispered. "I was foolish. I was afraid." "Afraid?" Najib repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Afraid of what? Of losing your position? Of sharing your father's affection?" Rima didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too shameful, too painful to bear. She had acted out of selfishness, out of a desperate need to protect her own privileged position. And in doing so, she had condemned her own sister to a life of servitude, a life of hardship and pain. Najib stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. He paced the length of the room, his mind reeling from the revelation. He felt a profound sense of anger, of betrayal, of disgust. But beneath the anger, he also felt a flicker of pity, a recognition of the tragic irony of the situation. He looked at Rima, huddled on the floor, a broken, weeping figure. He saw the fear in her eyes, the genuine remorse that now consumed her. He recognized the depth of her guilt, the weight of the burden she now carried. He knew that she had committed a terrible act, an act that could never be forgiven. But he also knew that she was a product of her upbringing, a woman shaped by the rigid hierarchies and ruthless power struggles of the court. He stopped pacing, his gaze softening as he looked down at her. He had to make a decision that would affect not only Rima and Aisha, but the future of Sabrim. He had to decide how to deal with this revelation, how to balance justice with mercy, how to restore order and stability to his kingdom. The weight of his crown, the burden of leadership, pressed down on him, heavier than ever before. The truth, like a double-edged sword, had cut through the lies and deception, leaving him with a choice that would test his wisdom, his compassion, and his very soul. The grand hall of the Sabrim Palace buzzed with anticipation. Courtiers, dignitaries, and members of the royal council filled the marble space, their whispers echoing against the high, vaulted ceiling. Sultan Najib stood on the raised dais, his expression solemn, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. Beside him stood Aisha, no longer in the simple garb of a slave, but dressed in a flowing gown of deep purple silk. The chains that had once bound her wrists were gone, replaced by a delicate gold bracelet, a symbol of her newfound freedom. Najib raised his hand, silencing the murmurs and commanding the attention of the court. "My loyal subjects," he began, his voice clear and resonant, "I have called you here today to address a matter of great importance, a matter that concerns the very foundation of our kingdom." He paused, letting his words sink in. For weeks, rumors have circulated throughout the palace, whispers of witchcraft, of betrayal, of a slave girl who has supposedly ensnared my affections and turned my heart away from my queen. He looked at Aisha, his gaze softening with affection and respect. These rumors, he continued, are based on lies, on a web of deception spun by those who seek to sow discord and undermine the stability of our kingdom. He turned to the assembled crowd, his voice rising with conviction. I stand before you today to declare that Aisha is innocent of the charges against her. She is not a witch nor a seductress, but a woman of great intelligence, integrity, and courage. A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Whispers erupted anew, their tone shifting from suspicion to curiosity. Furthermore, Najib continued, his voice ringing with authority, I have discovered a truth that has been hidden for far too long, a truth that has profound implications for us all. He took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. Aisha, he declared, is not merely a slave. She is my sister, the daughter of my wife's father, Hakim, by his second marriage. She was sold into slavery as a child, a victim of circumstance and a cruel betrayal. A gasp went through the crowd. The revelation hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. The whispers intensified, their tone now laced with shock and disbelief. Najib looked at Rima, who stood at the edge of the dais, her face pale and drawn. My wife, Sultana Rima, he said, his voice tinged with sadness, was unaware of Aisha's true identity until recently. She has confessed her role in the events that led to Aisha's enslavement, and she has expressed deep remorse for her actions. He turned back to the crowd. In light of these revelations, he announced, I have decided to dissolve my marriage to Sultana Rima. This decision has been made by mutual agreement, and it is done with a heavy heart. He looked at Aisha, his gaze filled with warmth and affection. I hereby declare Aisha free, he proclaimed, his voice echoing through the hall. She is no longer a slave, but a respected member of the royal family, my sister by blood, and a trusted advisor to the throne. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. The courtiers exchanged glances, their faces etched with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Rima stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. I accept the Sultan's decision, she said, her gaze downcast. I have committed a grave wrong, and I must atone for my sins. I will leave Sabrim and seek penance for my deeds in a distant land. She looked at Aisha, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and regret. Forgive me, sister, she whispered. Aisha nodded, her heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She knew that Rima's actions had caused her immense pain, but she also recognized the depth of her remorse, the weight of the burden she now carried. Rima turned and walked away, her head held high, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the palace corridors. Najib looked at Aisha, his gaze filled with warmth and gratitude. Welcome home, sister, he said, his voice soft and gentle. Aisha smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She had endured hardship, faced danger, and uncovered a truth that had shattered her world, but she had also found her family, her place, her purpose. She stood beside her brother, the Sultan of Sabrim, a free woman, a respected advisor, and a symbol of hope and resilience. The whispers of the court, the rumors, the accusations, faded into the background, replaced by a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that truth, however painful, would always prevail. The future of Sabrim, like the dawn breaking over the desert horizon, was filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of a new beginning. Life in the palace settled into a new rhythm. The initial shock of Najib's pronouncements faded, replaced by a grudging respect for his honesty and a cautious acceptance of Aisha's new role. The courtiers, who had once whispered about witchcraft and seduction, now spoke in hushed tones of Aisha's wisdom and insight. They marveled at her knowledge of history, her understanding of the kingdom's complex political landscape, and her unwavering commitment to justice and fairness. Aisha's days were no longer filled with the monotonous task of copying ancient texts. She now sat beside Najib in the council chamber, offering her counsel on matters of state, her voice clear and confident. She spoke for the voiceless, advocating for the poor and the marginalized, her words carrying the weight of her own lived experience. She challenged the established order, questioning outdated traditions and advocating for progressive reforms. Najib listened to her with respect, valuing her unique perspective and her unwavering commitment to the well-being of his people. He sought her advice on trade negotiations, border disputes, and matters of internal governance. He found her insights invaluable, her wisdom a refreshing counterpoint to the often self-serving agendas of his advisors. Together, they worked to improve the lives of the people of Sabrim. They implemented reforms that eased the burden of taxation on the poor, established schools and libraries in rural communities, and promoted trade and commerce throughout the kingdom. They fostered a climate of open dialogue and debate, encouraging dissent and valuing diverse perspectives. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, deepened with each passing day. They spent hours together discussing matters of state, debating philosophical concepts, and sharing their dreams for a better future. They found solace and strength in each other's presence, a quiet understanding that transcended the vast chasm that had once separated their worlds. The impossible romance that had flickered between them, a fragile flame in the darkness, had been extinguished by the harsh realities of their situation. They both understood that their love, however genuine, however deep, could never be. He was the Sultan, she his sister by blood, their paths forever intertwined, yet forever separate. But the affection remained, a deep, abiding respect and fondness that permeated their every interaction. They shared quiet smiles, knowing glances, a silent language of shared experience and mutual understanding. They found joy in their work, in their shared purpose, in their commitment to building a better future for the people of Sabrim. One evening, as the sun set over the palace gardens, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Najib and Aisha sat together on a marble bench, overlooking the city below. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and the distant sounds of music and laughter. "We have come a long way, haven't we, Aisha?" Najib said, his voice soft and reflective. Aisha smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet contentment. "Indeed, Your Majesty," she replied, "from slave to sister." "It has been an extraordinary journey," Najib chuckled. "And from a sultan who loved a slave to a brother who loves his sister and his advisor," he added, his voice warm with affection. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle in the gathering darkness. "Do you ever regret it, Aisha?" Najib asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Regret what might have been?" Aisha looked at him, her gaze steady and clear. "No, Your Majesty," she replied, "for what might have been could never be. But what is more than I could have ever hoped for." Najib smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He knew that Aisha spoke the truth. They had found something far more precious than a fleeting romance, a bond of mutual respect, affection, and shared purpose that would last a lifetime. They had found a love that transcended the boundaries of social status and political reality, a love that would guide them, strengthen them, and inspire them as they worked together to build a brighter future for the kingdom of Sabrim. And in that shared purpose, in that enduring affection, they found a happiness that was both unexpected and profoundly fulfilling. The story of the Sultan and the slave had ended, but the story of the brother and sister, the ruler and advisor, was just beginning.